Welcome to Real Talk in ELT, a podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English.
Hey there, welcome back. It is Kelly here. Another episode of Real Talk in ELT, and today I'm going to be looking at reading sub-skills. I have notes here. This is why I'm looking down. Sorry, I should be looking at you beautiful people while I'm introducing myself. Eye contact. Anyways, so recently, I've been working as a CELTA tutor and a mentor and a teacher trainer. So I've been doing kind of like a lot of stuff with teachers. And I was kind of surprised, but not in like a disappointed way, but just kind of surprised that some people that are coming into the profession, and this is no fault of their own, it was surprising to me that some people are a bit unaware that there are skills. When we say, well, I'm going to teach and today we're going to focus specifically on reading. When we say, I'm going to teach a reading class, most people's interpretation of reading classes is actually testing, not skill building. And that is unfortunate. But I also think if I reflect on it, I think that it comes from what we're exposed to when we are children. And so as children or young adults, when we go through the educational system, depending on where you grew up, depending on the school system that you attend, sometimes teachers don't address skill building, and you'll see more of a testing the skill. So let me give you an example of this. So if you go to any high school, wherever you might be, if you go to a high school and the teacher says, okay, we're going to be reading today. Great. Okay. And they have you sit down and they ask you a question about, I don't know, a specific topic. And they said, okay, now read the text and answer the questions. And so all the students sit down and they're reading their little texts and answering their comprehension questions. And then hopefully you'll be able to check with a partner, but maybe not. And then they say, okay, so Billy, number 1, Joan, number 2. Okay, so they start going through and they start checking the answers. And they just give you the correct answers. So let's say number 1, Billy, poor Billy, he says, oh, it's true. And everybody's like, nah! All the other students, you know how it is in high school, middle school, my goodness. Everybody's like, no, I got false. Okay, so then the teacher says, yes, it's false. And then the teacher moves on. And they correct all the answers, true and false. And there's no discussion. There's no nothing. There's no follow-up on that. And then they say, okay, so you're going to read the text again, and then you have another activity to do. So it's multiple choice or something like that. Okay. Then the one is matching, and then one is finding vocabulary, something like that. And the teacher goes through all of these activities, and then the class ends. And the students go out and they say, okay, we had a reading class today. And the teacher, depending on, institutional constraints or the teacher's development or how aware they are of skills, the teacher says, okay, I did a reading class. But was it? So if you're giving students tasks like reading, writing, speaking, or listening, and you're only giving them, and mostly when we're talking about reading and listening, the receptive skills, and you're only giving them the answers, if it's correct or not correct, you're testing. You're not teaching. And you're certainly not giving them an opportunity to build their skills. So let's talk about, first, we'll go through reading. So reading sub-skills, there's a few of them. I'm going to go through 5 today, and hopefully give you some ideas on how you can start to work on reading sub-skills. Because in reality, not everybody has awareness of this, of how to prepare a lesson, a reading lesson that's not testing reading, that's actually skill building. And it would very much benefit your students. So when we look at reading, we read in different ways. Everyone, humans, read in different ways. And to read in a different way, then we need to employ some sub-skills. Let me give you an example. So if I'm sitting on my phone, which is a common thing. I'm sitting on my phone and maybe I'm waiting for a doctor's appointment. And I happen to be on a news website. Or an app. And that's relatively common for me. And I'm just kind of flicking through on my phone, just kind of flicking through and seeing what's going on in the world. I'm not reading the same way that I would read if someone sent me an email. And I'm certainly not reading the same way if I'm home on a Sunday and it's raining and I've got a cup of tea and I'm curled up in bed with my dog and I've got a book. So we read in different ways. And because we read in different ways, we have different sub-skills of reading, and we have to be able to practice those. And we have to raise awareness of our students that they do this probably relatively proficiently in their L1. But that doesn't mean necessarily that those strategies to read and those sub-skills are being built in English. And so we have to just kind of make them aware and make sure that they know that they read in different ways. And if they can employ different strategies, then hopefully they'll become more successful readers. So let's talk about the first one. So the first one is skimming. Skimming, S-K-I-M-M-I-N-G, if you're writing it down, skimming is when we're reading quickly to understand the gist. So the gist is the general idea. So out of the three scenarios of me waiting at the doctor's office, me reading and responding to a email, or me reading a book with my dog, me skimming is probably going to be me sitting at the doctor's office, just flicking through the news stories. I'm not reading them to understand all the details. I'm just kind of understanding, like, what's the scenario? Like, what are they talking about? If I then decide, ooh, well, this headline is interesting, or, this picture, this first paragraph kind of grabs my attention after reading it quickly, skimming it, then I might go and read it intensively and start looking for details. But initially, as I'm flicking through, waiting for the doctors to call me, and I don't know if any of you have waited for a doctor's appointment in Brazil, it takes like at least an hour. So you're going to be skimming for a while, right? So that's skimming. I'm just trying to understand the general idea of what's going on. Now, if I'm doing that with my students, it would be really important for them to know that they don't have to understand all of the details. And that's not the expectation. They have to understand the general idea, the gist. And so the way that they do that is probably looking for keywords, is probably looking at pictures and headlines if they're available, is probably looking, and in most textbooks or course books that you see in English, there are pictures and headlines and things like that. Identifying some keywords, looking for some tone words also, that helps if the person is in support of, or is critical of, or if it's an opinion or things like that. You're just kind of looking to see, like, what is this? First of all, what is it? Am I looking at a newspaper article? Am I looking at an email? Am I looking at, I don't know, a blog post? Am I looking at a chat conversation? What am I looking at? And, like, what's going on here? That is skimming. Because we just want to know what it is and kind of what's the scenario. That's it. Now, to help your students with this, I highly recommend raising their awareness that this happens, that we do this. How could you do that? Well, you could give them a scenario, just like I gave you. I'm sitting at a doctor's office and I'm just kind of trying to see what's going on. And that might be good enough, right? And say, well, here's the scenario. That's how we're going to read this text. One of the things that I find teachers don't do is, hang on, let me see if I can find a quick resource here. One of the things that I find that teachers don't do is they don't set time limits for reading. And I find that to be unfortunate. And the reason that I find it to be unfortunate is because to do a gist reading task, to skim a text, what that means is you're going to do it very quickly. Now, if you have a text, depending on the text, depending on the level of the students, et cetera, there's a lot of depending on blah, blah, blah. You need to give them a short time limit, because that's the only way that they're going to practice that skill appropriately. If you don't give them a short time limit, if you give them unlimited time, I guarantee that the student is not going to skim the reading text. I guarantee that that student is then going to start reading intensively, and they're going to start looking for details, and they're going to try and understand as much as possible. And that is not the skill that you're trying to practice. So if they're skimming, give them a reasonably short time frame. I'll give you an example. I have a A2 level group, and they have a text that in a course book, it's like half a page, let's say, like a couple columns, half a page. I'll give them a minute. That's it. Sometimes less. If I have a really good reader that has really like refined sub skills, I'll give them 30 seconds because they're really good at it and they've been practicing for a while. So if I have like a B2, C1 level student and there's a 1-page newspaper article, I'll give them 45 seconds to look over it. And that's it. Why? Because they have to feel the pressure, because if they don't have the pressure of the time, then they're not going to be skimming. They're going to be doing something else. So that's that. Next up is scanning. Scanning is reading for specific information. When we read for specific information, it means that there's something there in the text. Because, and let me just clarify here, because these are sub skills. So we have skimming, scanning, reading for detail, guessing new words, and inference. We'll just do those 5. Reading for detail and reading for specific information are 2 different things. We have to kind of separate these 2 out. So if I'm scanning, I'm reading for specific information, meaning I'm looking for something specific that exists in the text. I'm looking for a number. I'm looking for an explanation. I'm looking for a definition. So if they're reading a text about, I don't know, the global economy, and we need the definition of macroeconomics from a specific professor, of how he's redefining macroeconomics and what that means. Well, okay, fine. So then that's something that's like directly in the text. If I can underline it, I'm reading for specific information. Reading for detail is different. You're reading to find precise information about specific points. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily in the text. Okay, so if I'm scanning, reading for specific information, then I'm looking for something that I can highlight, underline, circle, and I can answer a very specific question. If I'm reading for detail, then I have to understand specific information points, but that doesn't mean that I can underline it. So a difference in those 2 types of questions. If I have specific information and I'm scanning for it, how many countries have joined the advisory council by the end of 2022? It's a number. I can go in and I can find the number. Who was the president of the advisory council in 1991 when it was established? I can find the name of that person. What was the purpose of the 2018 campaign from the advisory council in Frankfurt, Germany? I can go in and I can say, okay, because somewhere in the text it says the reason or the purpose of this campaign was X, Y, and Z. All right, so I can find it there. Reading for detail is a little bit different. So if I'm reading for detail, then a question that would align with that. Would the author agree that the advisory council has been successful in the past 5 years under the new elected president? It might not explicitly say that in the text. You might have to kind of infer the author's purpose or their position on that based on what they say. So you could answer that question with, let's say, no, the author doesn't think that the new president of the advisory council has been successful. And then your teacher, if they're worth their salt, they'll say, why do you say no? And you would say, well, because I read this paragraph and this paragraph, and it's very critical of the new policies that they're implementing. How is it critical? Well, because the way that they're describing it, some of the adjectives here, the description of it here, they're using these things that have negative connotations. So I feel like he probably isn't supportive of it. Cool. That's reading for detail, because you have to read the text, understand what's happening. You're able to answer questions about specific points of the text, but it doesn't explicitly say it in the text. Now, these are two very different things if we look at them as sub-skills. So scanning, they have to read the question and know, what am I looking for and where can I find it? And it helps to give them a bit of orientation to that, meaning if they need to find it, and there's a lot of numbers, let's say they have to find a number and there's a lot of numbers in the text. Well, where exactly, in which paragraph? So they might, and this is all things that happen in your head, right? So this is not something that is just like, oh, okay, well, here's a step-by-step procedure. No, here's one way. If I'm looking for a number from the 1991 council's reports, or if I'm looking for a 2005 council reports or the 2018 council reports, where would I look for those? Oh, well, they were reporting 1991's here, and then in the 5th paragraph is when they went to 2005, but then they went back and so they can locate things and they're able to scan, right? Because they know where things are. They have a basic orientation of the text, and then they know where to look for specific information. Helping them get there is asking them questions. How are you going to do this? Where do you think you would find the answers to this one? Where would you find the answers to that one? What are you looking for? Are you looking for numbers? Are you looking for names? Like raising their awareness of all these things that probably happen in their head, so they don't have the tendency of going back to the text and rereading the entire text. No, that's not the skill that they're practicing. They should be practicing scanning. So looking quickly over it till they find the part that they need to focus in on, and then they can start reading for more detail or reading for more specific information there, because they're in the part that they know that they're supposed to be looking for a number, and then they can look at the different numbers and connect them to what they relate to. Reading for detail, so again, they're going to try to understand the message, but also they have to pick up on things that aren't in the text. So raise their awareness to that. Are you going to be able to underline something? No. If you're scanning, then yes, you can. Can I underline this? Yes, because you're scanning for specific information. If you're reading for detail, can you underline something in the text? Is it explicit? Will they tell you exactly? Or do you need to interpret a little bit? Allowing them to understand this prior to them reading is going to help them read better, because then they can look for the specific location where they should be reading. They can read appropriately, whether it's skimming, scanning, or reading for detail. And then also they are going to see, well, it's not in the text, so I have to interpret this, or it is in the text, I need to underline this, or I have a limited amount of time, I just need to look for keywords. All of these things are going to help build their reading skills. Next up is guessing new words. So using the context or cotext to derive a general understanding. Here's the thing about that. Oh, and I'm taking this from a from a fellow teacher. She's a CELTA trainer and she's amazing. And so she put these sub skills together. So I think it was just my interpretation of her slide. So she put the skill and then she put the definition and then you get all my commentary on it. So if you're guessing new words, you have to use the context to derive general understanding, meaning what does this word mean? It's going to be something that you haven't pre-taught them because it's not a word that's necessarily blocking. So they're able to do the other comprehension tasks without having this word. But maybe this word or phrase is interesting to include in their repertoire for what varying or whatever reason. This is a skill. So they have to, again, you have to give them a little bit of orientation because some people might not be very comfortable in doing this. It commonly comes as the task at the end of reading where it has like the definition in a blank and you have to find the word to match, or find something that it means this or is similar, or they give you the word and they say, is this like a good thing or a bad thing, or what does this mean in this context? That being said, how can we help students do that? Because we can't just give them a word and say, what does this mean? Well, they might not know. And even if they go back to the text, depending on their reading skills, they might not have the ability to figure out what the word means. So to help them do that, we can raise their awareness a bit about in what scenario is the author using this word? Author or speaker? I mean, I'm talking about reading, but you can obviously clearly link this to listening as well. But so the person that wrote this, why did they use this word? It could go to connotation. Is it does it have a positive or negative connotation to it? What are they talking about? What's the scenario? And then so they have to create a scene in their head and logically figure out what would be for them the most appropriate significance. So if we're talking about this made up fictional text of the an advisory council or something like that, maybe they use a word and the person is like, I have no idea what that is. And maybe it's like we could say maybe it's like a simple, like a balance sheet. So according to the balance sheets, or according to the financial reports, the bottom line was in the red or something like that. Well, okay. So if a company is in the red, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Why do you think it's a good thing or bad thing? Look at the paragraph. What were they talking about? And before and the sentences before and after, is it a good scenario that they're in, or is it a bad scenario that they're in? And what do you think in the red means financially? Do you think that they have extra money? Do you think that they have, or do you think that they're incurring debt? And then you can, try and ask these questions as an example, model it for them, so then they kind of have an idea. Oh, okay, so this is how I go about guessing what new words mean. And then you can give them activity and then they can try it for themselves. And so they look at another word or another phrase in the text and they say, okay, so what does this mean? Well, what's going on before, what's going on afterwards, and what would make sense here, and would it be positive or negative, right? And so these are questions that they should start asking themselves. Again, we need to give them orientation so that they can do this, so they can kind of build the skill of doing that. And finally, the last reading sub-skill that I'm going to talk about today, because I was not super inspired to make my own stuff. I'm stealing these. Well, I mean, I'm not stealing them. It's obvious they're in all the literature, but I'm taking it directly from a slide that one of my co-tutors, I guess that's what you call it, for a Celtic course did. And the last one she has listed is inference, and that means reading between the lines. I actually am very comfortable talking about inferencing because one of my Delta lessons, if you want to go to my website, one of my Delta lessons is on inferencing, and it's a reading. So there you go. There's an example of one. It's not perfect, I have to say. The further that I get away from my Delta course, the more that I realize I'm like, oh, I would change that. Oh, I don't know why I said that. So take it with a grain of salt, okay? Constantly evolving teacher. So inferencing is when you're reading between the lines, meaning the thing that your students have to understand. Ooh, hang on. I think it's a trash truck. Sorry. So the things that your students have to understand while inferencing is that they're going to be pulling information from multiple sources and piecing it together to try to understand what's happening. Let me give you an example. So, if if I've got a text message conversation back and forth, right? Between me and my husband, for example, and one of the lines that I sent him is, what would be a line that I frequently send my husband? Oh, sometimes here's a perfect example. Sometimes I'll just take a screenshot of some ridiculousness on the internet. I'll just take a screenshot and I'll send it to my husband. There is no context, nothing, but we read each other's minds like you wouldn't believe. And reading the mind of the author and the attendant audience is like half of the battle in inferencing. So I'll take a screenshot, something ridiculous I found online, take a screenshot and send it to him. Now, my husband, what he has to do, and what he's, as he's reading, I usually take screenshots of ridiculous news articles or posting. Somebody said something and it's just, I usually get, how can I even say this? Emotions run high frequently with me reacting to things on the internet. So what will happen is take a screenshot, send it to my husband. My husband will read, but he has to kind of infer like what is the message here, right? Because I didn't send him, this makes me angry. I didn't send him that. He just gets a screenshot from my phone. But what he's using is two resources of information. First, he knows me. I'm a crazy person. I'm nuts and I have very strong opinions of things, and he knows, I would say 99% of all of the opinions that I hold. We've been together for years, so he really, really understands me. And so I don't even have to say a word really. He knows where I am. So this is his previous experience. This is his background knowledge. This is all of the things that in our relationship that we've developed over the years. And then also, he has the information directly in whatever I send him. And what he's doing is he's kind of synthesizing or merging these two things. Like, I know Kelly, crazy person, and I know what is written in this text, right? And so he's using those two sources to infer what I'm trying to say to him. And I've said nothing. I've just sent him a picture, a screenshot of something. So this happened. So that's like my crazy example, but it's kind of perfect because because that's what students need to do. They need to use their background information, the knowledge, their experience, what they know about whatever they're reading, and they need to grab what the author is writing down. And then from those two pieces of information, they're inferring something else, right? So they're kind of extrapolating what they've gotten from the article. But they need to know that they have to do this, because for example, if we go back to scanning is exact information that I can circle here. Well, that's not going to be sufficient. That's not going to be enough. And reading for detail is there's something there, but we have to kind of understand the scenario too, but they're not using their personal information either. So that's it's a component, but it's not exactly inferencing. So they have to use their background information, their experience, and what's written there on in the text, and extrapolate, what does this mean? So I can infer a lot of different things. You can infer opinions, you can infer what the next possible thing is going to be, the reactions, lots of stuff. So you can infer, but it has those two components and they have to know this. So setting up a task of inference for them would be, what do you know about this? And I like, when I'm first doing reading subskills, I like to use models because I think it makes it a little bit easier. So you can set up like a series of questions. So what do you know about this? What exactly does the author say? Okay, so with these two pieces of information, what can we infer? What can we conclude? What can we extrapolate from here? And what can we, what would you think based on those two things? So, well, this has been like 30 minutes long so far. So anyways, hopefully this will give you a little bit of an idea of reading subskills. So the ones that I went over today: skimming, scanning, reading for detail, guessing new words, and inference. Great. Those are kind of core reading subskills. So your students should be able to do those. How can we not test them on it? So this is the important part, because we can't test somebody on something if they're not practicing, right? We want them to build the skills. We don't want to test their skills. Sometimes we may want to test them, but for the vast majority of their lessons, you're teaching them and they're practicing. So all of the techniques and the questions and the raising awareness, I would suggest to do that before you do a reading. It gets easier and easier. I'm very good at training my students now. So I think some of my students could actually become English teachers, because I will give them the instructions and they can see the activity and say, okay, you've got 30 seconds. What are you doing? And they say, oh, I'm skimming because I'm reading for just general information. Literally, I've trained my students to that level that they know exactly. And I'm like, and how do you skim? How do you read for gist? And they know how to, keywords, I'm going to look at the pictures, I'm going to do this. So they've already kind of accepted that I'm a crazy person, but they know how they should approach the task. So after a while, they get used to it because they know how they should be doing the task. And then after, what I like to do is check the answers with them. Hopefully they've gotten the majority of answers correct. If they haven't, that's okay. And what I do is we have like a reflection moment. So you didn't get this answer. Why did you choose this answer? Or why did you answer this way? And then I always have them go back to the text. Show me in the text, where did you see this and why did you interpret it this way? Okay, so then we kind of clarify, make sure that everything's understood, and there might be a vocabulary word or a misinterpretation, or they read it fast or whatever. So we kind of deal with that. And then I usually like to ask them, okay, so next time, because if they're not getting 75 to 80% of the questions right, I usually demand at least 80%. If they're not getting 80% of the questions right, then I have them sit there and talk to me about what they're going to do for the next time they have to do that. Like how can we prepare a little bit better? What are some other strategies that we can use? Because they need to know how to approach things. So when we're how not to test, when we're setting up the task, raise awareness of the sub skills that they're going to be using and what strategies they can use to support those sub skills. Have them do the task. If it's reading, be quiet, let them think, let them do it, but set a time frame so that they're managing and strategizing. They're managing their time correctly. Check the answers with them. Have them always go back and justify their answers in the text. Why did you get this? Why did you say that? Especially if it's wrong, then for sure you definitely have to do that. Even if it's right, have them justify. Oh, because I saw it here. Good, excellent. Move on. If they're unsuccessful about applying reading strategies and building those sub skills, then have a moment with them to re-strategize and think about, did you get distracted? Did you get stuck on a word? Sometimes that happens, especially in listening. They'll get like stuck on a word and then just blank out. They won't listen to the rest of the thing. Happens in reading too. Instead of, skimming over something, they'll start like focusing really narrow and then they're like, oh, time's up or something like that, and they're like, oh God, you know what? It was just, as long as they can recognize that they misused a strategy, that's fine. Then the next time they'll get better at managing themselves and not getting hyper focused if they're trying to do skimming, etc. Vice versa with all the other sub skills. So if you're really trying to have a reading skills lesson, then you need to raise their awareness of what they're doing, allow them to do it, have them justify it, and have them re-strategize if necessary, and reflect on the I guess the appropriate, like how well they applied the strategy that they were supposed to apply. That's it. That's it for my my ranting and raving on on reading sub skills. I think it's important. So if you don't know about these things, feel free to like reach out to me. If you have a different way of approaching reading sub skills that you found to be very successful and is not testing, is actually focusing on comprehension and being able to build sub skills, I would love for you to comment or send me a message. Beyond that, I am going to leave you for the day thinking about how you can not test your students. Sometimes we have to, but not test your students, but actually develop their reading skills. That's it, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. Want to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify channel to stay up to date, and of course, take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.